House Bill 608 by Representative Wilder provides relative to women, safety protection of women, distinction between sexes, provide for legislative intent, purposes, definition, standard review, causes of action. And on behalf of the Bureau, Representative Horton sends up technical amendments.
Without objection. Rep. Wilder on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I'm here today to bring House Bill 608, the Women's Safety and Protection Act. I was asked by my constituents to bring this bill because of an incident that happened in my district. We had a specific occurrence at a public facility where a biological male demanded access to the female changing rooms, locker rooms, and showers, spaces that are designated and occupied by women and young girls. The officials declined to allow it, citing their desire to protect the trusted privacy and safety of our women and daughters. There were then mentions of legal threats and legal action where the employees actually feared that they themselves may be sued individually. We've heard of situations like this happening in other parts of the country where young women are humiliated, frightened, or made to feel vulnerable by policies that allow males to use their locker rooms, restrooms, and overnight lodging. And now this has happened in our state and in my district. So I was asked to bring this bill. I promised my constituents, I promised the women in my district and across our state, and I promised my wife and my daughter that I would bring this bill. Our intent is to send a clear message that Louisiana will absolutely preserve the privacy, dignity, and safety of women and girls. One of the primary duties of government is to provide for the public safety and welfare of our citizens. That includes protecting the most vulnerable places such as locker rooms, restrooms, and changing rooms, but also places such as detention centers and domestic violence shelters. We must defend the dignity, safety, and welfare of all women. I'm standing for the basic understanding that there are biological differences between females and males that create the need for separate privacy spaces for said females and males, something that has been accepted as commonplace since time immemorial. Again, this bill's goal is to put women first by affording them confidence in their privacy and safety in female-only use areas. Women and girls must know that they are truly protected from the vulnerability of intrusion, embarrassment, trauma, and unfortunately, in the worst cases, situations of assault or potential physical harm. 10 other states have already taken this step to protect the privacy for biological females, including Arkansas, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, just to name a few. It is time for Louisiana to step up and ensure that every woman in our state has the same protections in place here. For my district, for this entire state, this bill ensures that our private spaces in our schools, women's shelters, and prisons remain private, safe spaces for everyone. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment to offer and would then like to take questions.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Wilder offers up a two-page set of amendments, set number 2854.
Rep. Wilder on your amendment.
So this amendment is, there's 8 pieces. Most of them are technical with respect to capital letters and punctuation. The one from line 9 to 15, Representative Larverdane and I worked on this. It was his concern. The Attorney General has worked on this. There was an initial concern. 2 weeks ago, the domestic violence shelters actually called me and asked to take them out of the bill, all because of a federal government that would, I guess, in a sense, extort us to do what they want us to do. The concern was absolutely something we were wanting to address, and after discussing it with the Attorney General and the individual who is in charge of the domestic violence shelters, the lady who spoke at the committee meeting, we came up with this amendment which satisfied her concerns, and I believe it satisfied the concerns that we had therein.
Rep. Freeman for a question on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Wilder, I just want to confirm, because I've done a lot of work for the domestic violence victims across the state. So this is really important to those that I represent and to many of us in here who are either victims ourselves or have relatives who are victims. So I just want to make sure that from this amendment and your understanding that the $14 million that these centers across the state are receiving is not in jeopardy from the federal government.
From my understanding, as asserted by the Attorney General and I don't want to name her name, although she's in public record, the individual I spoke to at the domestic violence
The domestic
shelter.
violence coordinator, Mariah Wineski, yes.
Phone on my desk
Yes.
has a text message as of yesterday indicating that this is exactly what she asked for.
Okay, and I have worked with her, and I have spoken to her as well. I just wanted to confirm for the record.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we do not want to put our funds, did you know, at risk for domestic violence. We're number 4 in the nation as one of the worst places, and I do not want us to become number 1. We've been working very hard to not be at the top of that list. Did you know?
Yes, ma'am, I know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rep. Willard for a question on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Rep. Wilder, this amendment satisfies the concerns about the domestic violence dollars being in jeopardy?
Yes, it does.
Okay. This amendment is because the federal government was extorting us?
Well, I mean, maybe I didn't use the correct word, but I believe when you're pushing items that are not constitutionally granted to you, that you're taking away the 10th Amendment of our state's rights, and I think that would be forcibly using money to make me do something that we don't want to do. So maybe I used the wrong word, but I just believe we should have our 10th Amendment rights when things are not asserted in the Constitution. In this case, the concerns were that higher levels of certain agencies that have established rules the lady from the domestic violence shelters was concerned about that. Well, so this addressed her concern.
Okay, but I'm trying to understand what the federal, seems like we had an ultimatum or something. What was the federal government forcing us to do?
I'm not exactly sure. It had to do
Okay.
with how they were housing.
Okay.
So one of the concerns that they had was actually addressed. I don't have the document with me, but the Attorney General actually showed the lady that on the 3rd column, they were actually complying with the regulation, because a lot of these shelters are actually houses. So they have multiple rooms,
Right.
And they're allowed to say, look, if you are a male, we can put all of you in one room. If you're a female, we can put all of you in another room. So they were actually, by the way they were operating, and if I'm not mistaken, the majority of the shelters, they were already in compliance, but her concern was, what if?
Do you know why a lot of domestic violence shelters are houses? Do you know why?
I do not, but I'm glad
Okay.
they're there.
Well, a lot of them are, did you know, a lot of them are not marked, and they're in regular everyday neighborhoods so that they can be incognito, so that the victims of domestic violence don't have to worry about being easily identified coming and going from a shelter. So that's why.
I did
So-
not know that, but thank you, because
Yeah.
that actually helps what we're trying to do and protect those individuals.
So I guess what my question on the amendment, it seems like it allows them to do some things, but I still have an issue about, I guess, capacity. So can you explain exactly what the amendment does on page 4, line 24, because it's talking about establishing single occupancy restrooms and changing rooms and redesignating to multiple occupancy restrooms and sleeping quarters. Do we know if the domestic violence facilities in Louisiana have the capacity to do this?
That was not a concern of mine with respect to, my concern was the lady who represents this, that's what she does. When she told me this amendment addresses every concern, please roll with the bill, I figured I had that's what she does. She advised me, and then the legal
Okay.
side was advised by the Attorney General in conjunction with this lady.
Were you working with Ms. Wineski in Miss Sport? Those? Okay. All right. Thank you, Rep.
Thank you, Rep.
You have no further questions on the amendment, or is any objections to the adoption of the amendment? Hearing no objections, the amendment is adopted. Ms. Taylor, you have an objection on the amendment? Okay. Hearing no objections on the amendment is adopted. Back on the bill. Rep. Willard for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Wilder, we talked about, the bulk of the things that I wanted to discuss, and I was very concerned about, us jeopardizing the federal dollars for domestic violence shelters. Just a couple of questions. So overall, what's the motivation behind this bill? I heard you talking about your wife and your daughter, but what's the motivation behind this bill?
The motivation is that no woman's right to privacy should be contingent upon someone else's beliefs or their feelings.
And this bill fixes that?
This bill simply seeks to provide the right of privacy to be established for biological females.
How do you feel about the right to privacy between a woman and her doctor, that relationship?
I think that's covered in other medical law. Is it not?
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and sometimes the legislature gets involved in areas that, if you really want to have that right to privacy, we're not allowing that to happen.
Well, if you'd like to bring an amendment of such or run a bill of such, I'd encourage you to do so.
Okay. What evidence do you have to support this as a good policy? How do you think this will really protect the women in the state of Louisiana?
Well, I think we're putting ourselves in a position where, do you need examples? Would that help?
What's that?
Can you repeat the question specifically? That was long.
Yeah, I said, what evidence do you have that this will be a good policy that will protect women in the state of Louisiana?
I think the evidence would be the number of cases that have included physical assault, harm, and other examples. Why not eliminate that opportunity?
How does this eliminate that opportunity, though?
Well, hang on. Restrooms, 2021, Loudoun County, Virginia, male teen.
You have examples in Louisiana?
Examples in Louisiana. I have an example of a situation where this happened in my district, but Representative Willard, I would prefer us to not need to have an example in order for us to take care of this. 0 examples is my number. What's yours, sir?
You're not supposed to ask me questions, but you don't have an example of it happening in Louisiana?
With respect to specific physical harm?
No, I'm asking. My question was, what evidence do you have that this is a good policy that will advance women's rights and help women out in the state of Louisiana?
Well, I think if we're going to debate whether it's good policy to advance women's rights, that's a different conversation. I'm not implicating women's rights in here. I'm more concerned about their protection.
So this bill really relates to bathrooms, changing rooms, areas like that. We might agree on some things, we might disagree on some things. I guess I'm asking what evidence or examples occurred in Louisiana to show that this bill is needed right now.
So an example being specific to the state is not why I did this. I think there's examples nationally where it's happening, and I think it's appropriate to prevent any circumstances that would endorse that or encourage that or put us in a position where that could happen.
So I just want to make sure this legislative body wasn't asleep at the wheel and missed something. So just to be correct here, you don't have any instances of this happening in Louisiana?
In Louisiana, no, but I'll be glad to share 20 with you from other states and in the country.
Okay, I'm a state representative in Louisiana. Thank you, Rep. Wilder.
Sir.
Rep. Mandy Landry for a question on the bill.
So do I understand it? You said something happened in your district where there was a lawsuit?
No, what I said was one of the individuals was an attorney,
Okay.
and according to the people I interviewed 3 weeks ago about this specifically to make sure I had the facts straight, there was a lot of legal jargon thrown around. They don't understand that, so they were concerned about that, and it scared them.
And it was, I think you told me before, the parent of a child?
No, it was 2 adults. One female adult, one biological male adult. The biological male adult basically wanted access to the female showers, locker rooms. And this facility has ages from 5 to however old, and the public officials declined.
Okay.
They were threatened.
My mistake. I thought you had told me a while ago it was a child. Where was this?
It was at a public facility in our parish, in our district. I'd prefer not to disclose specifics.
Well, you're asking us to pass a bill on one instance.
It was at a public park.
I don't think it's appropriate. Excuse me, do you think it's appropriate to ask the legislature to pass an entire bill on one instance and we don't know where it happened?
No, ma'am. I believe it's appropriate that when a Wyoming male assaulted a 10-year-old little girl in the bathroom and touched her breasts and genitalia, including other things I don't want to discuss in this house, I think that's why I'm doing this, ma'am.
Don't you think that sounds like assault by an adult on, I think you said a child?
I said, yeah, I would agree with that, but he was allowed in the restroom.
You realize that adults, that children who are sexually assaulted, they usually know their abuser. Did any national organizations, did you work with any national organizations on this legislation?
The Louisiana Family Forum, the Alliance Defending Freedom, they helped.
Okay, you said they helped, did they provide some of the language for this bill?
In some cases, they help provide some of the language, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I'm sure you're aware that in the past few years, Senator Mizell and Representative Furman also had bills involving transgender children and people. Were you aware of those bills?
I'm aware of those bills.
And did you feel they didn't go far enough in terms of what you were trying to do?
No, ma'am, this bill simply seeks to provide for the right to privacy.
So you think they didn't go far enough?
I didn't really look at them too deeply. I watched the videos, but I didn't read the legislation. I thought it was, let's just start here and go with it, so we crafted legislation.
You didn't read those two bills?
Not entirely. I've skimmed through them. I didn't think it was necessary.
Okay. Sorry, my notes are out of order. When did this happen in your district?
A few years ago.
A few years ago. And you were told this a few years ago or recently?
I was told this 3 weeks ago when I sat there in front of two individuals. One was called from the other facility to come over and sit and verify the facts.
So let me understand. Did you file this bill or draft this bill before you knew about the incident?
I did.
Okay. Did someone ask you to do this?
No, ma'am, I did this because I have a daughter.
Okay. Are you worried this might be considered unconstitutional?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And I wouldn't say it makes sense to me, but what's been going on the last few years in the country with this issue has involved schools and school-related activities, and I think prisons, but I have never heard of this being applied to domestic violence shelters, so I'm wondering why you included them originally in this legislation.
Well, I would like to think, and we probably all agree, that anyone in a domestic violence shelter is already traumatized. That's the kind of the definition of the shelter. I'm not sure why would we want to expose any additional trauma or potential trauma.
I'm just wondering how that came about, because it's not something I had heard about before. Was it just your
Yes,
thoughts?
ma'am. It was me. It came about by looking through and figuring
Okay.
out every potential opportunity of.
So I know several trans people, and there's quite a few who you would never know this. So, for example, if a trans man goes into a women's bathroom who presents very strongly of a man, what's going to happen then if the women in there are concerned that who they think is a man is in their bathroom? The confusion.
You confused me on the question.
So I think a lot of the presumption in this bill is that people automatically know if someone is transgender, but there are many trans people who no one suspects that they are trans, I guess I should say. So imagine we have someone who is a trans man who goes into a women's bathroom who completely fools everyone, I guess I should say. I hate to say that. What happens when the women in there have a concern because they think a man is in their bathroom? Because visually they think this person is a man.
I mean, I still don't understand what the question is. I mean, that could be happening right now.
I guess my question is, what if there's confusion among the people in the bathroom? It's okay. Enforcement, how are we going to enforce this outside of prisons?
So schools have access to birth certificates. The Department of Corrections can easily gain access to birth certificates. And I think the other way is asking Asking is pretty easy. It's not uncommon. We get asked everything about ourselves on every government form we fill out.
So in all these places, is the idea that there's going to be someone checking, or that the issue will only present itself if another person questions it?
I think this bill gives a guidance, and it gives the locals the flexibility to address.
Okay, so there's a lot of vagueness in here, or a lot of permissiveness in how it is enforced.
I don't think so.
Okay. In one of these situations, a trans person goes into the bathroom that this legislation requires. What if they are harmed? What if they are the ones who are harmed in that bathroom or that shelter or wherever?
I would assert that any laws in place now would take effect, because that situation could occur today. And
Isn't that the same about what your legislation involves?
no, ma'am. I'm simply trying to preserve the right for women and girls to feel protected in vulnerable areas.
So you're a guy, but in women's bathrooms, if in any woman's bathroom I've ever been into in my life, there are doors surrounding the stalls. Do you think that's not enough privacy for the people using them?
Rep. Landry, I've spoken to every female representative in this chamber to ask them if they could help me make this bill better. And more than one of them asserted to me that they have been in the bathroom and had an individual with the feet facing the wrong way in the stall next to them, and they were very uncomfortable. If the stalls went from ceiling to ground, there's a lot of ways to solve this without having a 10-year-old little girl in the most vulnerable place she could be, in a state of undress, walk into a position where she feels vulnerable, she loses her trust, she loses her innocence. There are a number of opportunities that we can chase that don't involve just a zero-sum game of, well, we're just going to do it this way. There are community restrooms, there are single-sex restrooms, there are multi-sex restrooms, family restrooms. There's a lot of municipalities addressing this that don't include just arbitrarily saying, nope, sorry.
Did you say that you spoke to every woman in this chamber about this bill?
I had a list and I scratched off one by one.
Everyone.
If I'm not mistaken, every one. If I made a mistake and missed one, it's because I didn't write that individual down on the list when I went around.
Do you mean you spoke to them about passing the bill? What did you do?
I took a knee next to most desks, introduced myself, and said this was a great way to get to meet you since I'm a freshman. I gave most a copy of the bill. If not, told them the bill number, told them the intent, and asked for any assistance to strengthen this bill in a positive manner.
You didn't get a good response from me, did you?
No, ma'am.
Did you know that I have trans constituents?
I did not know that.
I have one in this chamber. He's a very good friend. Do you think he's worried about his safety now?
Not sure.
I am. Our job here is to protect the residents of this state. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. All people deserve respect and dignity. We absolutely have to have a compassionate approach to everyone's privacy, but men and women's spaces is not the answer.
Well, you know, it's very interesting to me that this was never an issue until national organizations made it an issue. I'm concerned about the residents of my city and my district who now feel unsafe in this building. Do you understand why they might feel unsafe in this building?
I do not.
Do you know that for 4 years we have had bills that are attacking trans people?
I've heard there were bills.
Do you know that they live here too?
Nope.
Trans people don't live in Louisiana?
You asked me a close-ended question. Did I know? I answered no.
Thank you.
Rep. Taylor for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first question I have for you, are you aware of the fact that I was in the committee room when this was discussed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I heard absolutely nothing that was discussed about extortion of money from the federal government. Did you hear something contrary to that?
No, ma'am. That was my opinion based on the fact that we're being asked to do things and the threat is funding.
And did the people who were present tell you that all of their funding came from the federal government? If you implemented this, this could jeopardize them receiving funds to keep the shelters open. Did they not say that?
Not exactly. They indicated that some of their funding comes from the federal government and some of it comes from the state, as verified with Rep. McFarland. And the amendment addresses their funding concern.
You heard no testimony about this could affect their funding and the shelters are very needed and that they needed these shelters.
That is what Ms. Sport testified against as per Rep. Willard's question. And yes, ma'am, we heard the testimony and we addressed her concern and she is content.
And did we all indicate that we are very concerned about the safety of women, girls? Well, not everybody. Some of us indicated we are concerned about the safety of women, girls, boys, and men, and also trans people. We're concerned about everybody's safety.
I believe that was the consensus.
I think I just want to clarify that there was no discussion at all with reference to extortion of funds from any person by the federal government.
Okay, members, the member's out of time. Is there any objection to give an additional 5 minutes? Hearing no objections, the member has an additional 5 minutes. Rep. Morcell on the.
Thank you, Representative Wilder. I'll be very brief. I didn't hear this discussion. I'm not on civil law, but I'm trying to get clarity on what facilities does this include when you say you're trying to protect our children, and I certainly want to do that, and women. What facilities does it include? I see public schools. There's some mention of domestic violence shelters, and it looks like juvenile facilities, or just do you have a list of what all is included in it?
Sure, give me a second. It's in alphabetical order, so it doesn't contain listing as in the respect to category. I know that it includes restrooms. It's a state level bill, so it includes restrooms, changing rooms, domestic violence shelters.
When you say changing rooms, help me with that.
Rep, I'll be glad to go through the bill and find every one of these.
No, I'm not. I'm really not. I'm trying to really understand it. So when you say changing rooms, I thought I saw that. Changing rooms where? Is that at an athletic facility or something like that?
I would consider a locker room a changing room.
A locker room, right?
Correct.
So this is just as it relates to schools, domestic violence shelters,
A park.
and an athletic facility. So I'm going to ask you, how do we enforce this? And the reason I'm asking you that is because if we're talking about protecting our young women and kids from some type of predators that may identify themselves as something other than what they were born, I guess my question would be, I particularly know a transgender person that was born a woman, but they identify as a man. And so having them to go into which facility would this bill do? So if they were to go, let me ask it like this. If that person were to go into a restroom and let's just say the school auditorium change room with their child, because they do have children, right?
Right.
That person looks like a man, but they were born as a woman. do you think this bill will cause some more confusion? Because right now, they may, I don't know, I've never asked them, they may go into a male restroom because they look like a male, but they were actually born as a woman. Do you think that with this bill passing, somebody would say, oh, well, this is a man in this restroom, this causes me some issues, but it's actually the reverse of what you're saying. So help me with that scenario.
That is a lot of confusing. I think that's the point. I don't think we have any clarity right now. I think everyone's confused. So the purpose of this bill is that municipalities defer to the state. It's the state's job to put laws into effect. So this is an attempt at one.
I got it, Representative Wilder. I understand with your intent, but sometimes our legislation have ill effects on real life situations. And this real life situation is one I'm familiar with this individual that looks like a man. So where would you want that individual to go in the restroom?
I would assume per the bill. They're born biological
Pardon me?
sex.
So that would mean that they would need to go in the restroom with a woman, which would cause...
Marcel, in the 80s, we had a situation where if you were in a wheelchair, you had no options. Someone took it upon themselves to run legislation and create the American Disabilities Act.
And I'm glad they did.
Maybe you should create, could work, I'll work with you if you want to try to find some legislation or avenues that fix the problem that you're talking to me about. I'm simply trying to fix this problem as a starting point, which is the state's obligation to provide for the right to privacy that we've known since time immemorial for women and little girls.
I understand what your intent is, but sometimes we have legislation, did you know, that don't take into real life circumstances, and it happens after we've passed the legislation. So my concern about this bill is transgender people, how would you know, and I'm just, because I wasn't there for the discussion, help me, how would I know as a grandmother, and I'm in there with my granddaughter, if a person comes in that looks like a woman, they're in their stall, I'm in my stall, how would I know that that person is not a woman? Unless they reveal themselves to me, which is already against the law.
As of right now, there is no guiding law in place, at which point we will have a law. I'd like to think most of our citizens in the state would follow the law. So if that were to happen, then the situation you're suggesting wouldn't occur.
How would it not occur if I identify, and by the way, I didn't speak to you about this bill. You didn't bring this bill to me. And by the way, I identify as a woman in the House. So I didn't know if I wasn't here or if you thought I was something else, but I'm a woman and I didn't talk to you about this bill. But I'm very serious about this. If someone is a transgender and they identify as something and they dress like what they're not, how does this bill help with that? Because if you come in looking like a woman and you go in the bathroom with me, I'm not going to try to touch you to figure out if you are a woman. Unless you exposed yourself to me, how would I know that? Why is this an issue?
I think as stands today, it's a congruent issue today as it would be under the situation when this would pass. The difference would be currently without a law, there's a lot of opportunity for threats or for confusion. For instance, currently, if a biological male in a school says, I'm a female today, I'm going in that restroom, there's no law. There's confusion. There are faculty and administrators that look at each other going, what do we do? This solves that. So I think that the sanity of just having the law in place to start with respect to giving a guideline.
I think that, and did you know, I believe that we're getting to a place like in malls and different places that they're putting restrooms up that's for either or so that there's no confusion about who can go in those. And they're separate from the ones that say women and men. Did you know? So perhaps we may want to put some money in the schools for those types of restrooms so that people won't feel uncomfortable or that way may not be any confusion. But did you know, I believe that your bill may bring on additional confusion as it relates to people who I just told you about, real life people that I know that look like a man, but it's a woman. So if they come in the restroom with my granddaughter, that may be a problem. Without this law, they probably gonna go in the male's restroom because that's what they identify as and look like. And that's my only point. Thank you, Representative Wilder.
Members, I just want to remind you, the purpose of a question is to obtain information, not supply it to the body. Saying no does not make it a question. The member is out of time. Is there an objection to giving an additional time? There is an objection. All those in favor of giving additional time, vote yea. Those opposed, vote nay. Members, vote your machines. Madam Clerk, open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machine. Nay, Jordan. Nay, Eccles. Yay, Hilferty. Yay, Knox. The clerk will close the machine. We have 30 yeas, 57 nays, and the member is out of time. 1 minute. We have an amendment. Just want to let you all know there was about 8 people still to ask questions on both sides of the aisle.
Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Mandy Landry offers up one-page 7 amendments, 2867.
Rep. Mandy Landry on your amendment.
Hey, so a few of us brought up how there's actually also risk to the trans person in these situations, especially if someone doesn't know they're trans or dislikes trans people or just has opinions some kind of way, especially with children. So I think there needs to be some penalties as well for someone who harms these people in particular because of the sensitive nature here, because of their vulnerability, especially when it's children. So we pulled the punishments or whatnot from revised statute 15:541. This is the same punishment or the same amount of years that's already in this statute, and it makes it clear that people who are trans, who are assaulted in some way because of this legislation will also have the same, that their assault, that the people who assaulted them will also face the same level of punishment, if I said that right.
Rep. Furman for a question on the amendment.
Representative Landry, over here,
To your
Am I
right.
looking?
Rep. Landry to your right.
right here. You keep referring to trans, and I don't see that in this bill. Can you explain to the body exactly what you mean when you use that terminology? Thank you.
Well, there have been about,
Rep.
someone-
Fontenot, why do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm questioning the germaneness. She's trying to add a criminal offense which doesn't pertain to this bill.
Okay, members, so this bill provides for a cause of action lawsuits. To enforce the bill, the amendment sets forth criminal penalties, so therefore you're correct. I do find it not germane. Rep. Freeman for the floor on the bill. Amy Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I know you have specific opinions about this, but I want you to stop and think, and I think this deserves some attention and not some chitter-chatter, because these are people's lives that we are talking about. These are people that live in our communities. These are your nephews, your nieces, your sisters, and your brothers that we are legislating hateful legislation against. And I rise in opposition to this bill. This is another year where we are trying to pass legislation that affects 1.4% of the entire U.S. population. We have a lot of serious business to take care of in here. The fact that we are seriously discussing, legislating hateful legislation against a population of people who I happen to represent in the city of New Orleans. People that I know, friends, family members, people that I love and respect. And for us to cut limitation on this is quite aggravating to me. And you don't see me get angry up here very often. Probably the last time was when we were debating tort reform. But this piece of legislation makes me angry because it's hateful and spiteful. And I know many of you have had private conversations with me about the lesbian, gay, and trans members of your own families on a one-on-one basis. So I want you to think how you're going to feel when you go back home to them and tell them why this is so important. Let the individual districts, school districts, the parks, let them put the sign on the door and decide how they're going to handle this. For us to take this to the state level and put legislation in place at the state level is a hateful, mean-spirited way to treat a small population of the state who is not known for being higher risk as sex offenders. They are not known for, creating havoc in your communities. The most highest risk of a sex offender is a white male. So should we keep them out of all of the bathrooms? That's probably a great idea. I just can't take having hateful legislation. This is my 5th year of seeing hate after hate after hate against people who live in this community. And I had a constituent in my community move with himself and his husband and his 2 children out. He was a very qualified, high specialty doctor, I believe, at either Ochsner or LCMC. He left the state of Louisiana because we were passing this kind of legislation. So don't kid yourselves. When you talk about passing good business legislation, which you all know I vote for a lot of the business legislation on this floor, but when you pass hateful legislation against our LGBTQ community, it is very, very spiteful and mean, and people leave our state because of it. And I am sorry that the people of the state have to hear this, but we should not be passing this hateful, mean legislation. And I very, very distinctly object to this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rep. Freeman, do you want to take any questions? She waves. Rep. Amadei for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise. I'm sure it won't surprise you that I rise in support of the bill, but the main reason I took the floor was just to clarify one point that was hit on a little earlier today, and that is a point where the author of the bill chose the word extortion. Maybe it was a good word, maybe it wasn't, but he wasn't here in the House in 2022 when the Biden administration did take actions through the U.S. Department of Agriculture that would have threatened or possibly threatened the money that some schools get for food for students based on their policies about bathrooms. So yes, whenever the federal government is going to take our tax dollars and possibly refuse to give them back to us for purposes like feeding children at school, based on whether or not our schools put in policies that align with the administration's political agendas that don't align with the vast majority of the citizens of our state, it feels like extortion. So I just wanted to say that, and I ask for your favorable passage of the bill so we can get back to common sense.
Rep. Horton for the floor.
Members, I rise in support of this bill. It's a shame that we even have to pass a bill that defines the sexes. It's a shame that we have to stand here and argue and that we are where we are in society today. I have 3 daughters. I have 2 granddaughters. You all have daughters, sisters, nieces, nephews in your family. Nowhere in this bill mentions trans at all. At all. It's not against anyone. It is for the vast majority of our citizens and their children and their daughters. This is who this is for. We are here today, Representative Wilder's bringing a bill. It's common sense legislation that adds protection for your daughters, for females. And I've never seen so many females stand up against a bill that is to protect women and our daughters. That is what this bill is about. Simply put, it's not anti-anyone, but it's a protection for our children, for our daughters, against predators. No one says trans are predators. There are predators out there, believe me, and I pray that this bill would stop, or at least help people think twice before they go into a bathroom that they don't belong in. And I thank Representative Wilder for his boldness and his courage of bringing this. And it's a common sense legislation we must support on behalf of our daughters. And thank you, Representative Wilder, for bringing it.
Rep. Gale for the floor. Rep. Horton, Rep. Marcel has a question. She waves.
Many of us have children in here. Some of them are little girls. I'm one of them. So let me start off by saying I don't understand either why there's such a pushback to put forth legislation that is simply protecting our daughters and our granddaughters and our nieces. That's all this is about. And I wholeheartedly reject the notion that this is about hate. That is a complete mischaracterization. This is not about hate. It has nothing about hate. I'm a practicing Catholic. My faith requires me to love everyone, every single one, and I do. But we all have young daughters, and they need protection, especially the youngest of them. And that's all this legislation is trying to do. And I don't see why it's such a problem to put up more guardrails to protect our daughters. All you have to do is do an internet search. You can find multiple examples of where men identifying as women have gone into restrooms and have committed assault. And yes, there are laws in the books already. This is true. But why not put one more, to maybe put up one more guardrail to prevent one more assault? That's all this bill is intended to do. It's not about faith. Let me go back. It's not about hate. It's about protecting our daughters. That's it. No more, no less. I co-authored this bill, and I hope you can support it. Thank you.
Rep. Gale, do you want to take any questions, Rep. Gale? Rep. Marcel, do you have a question for Rep. Gale? You have your question button pressed. Okay, Rep. Marcel for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. First of all, I rise because some of the questions that I was asking are real-life questions. It was whether or not a person who identifies themselves as a man goes into that same bathroom with a young lady, how do you determine that that is a male or a female? If you're in your stall and I'm in my stall, unless somebody shows themselves to the other person, how would you know that? And so I believe that this fear that they are putting out here is unrealistic. And by the way, women voting against women, that was like really sparked me to come to the floor. When we talk about women having equal pay, women in this very House vote against women in the state of Louisiana having equal pay. Women in this very House voted against trafficking with lesser sentences and domestic violence victims. Women in this House. So don't bring up women voting against women or women standing up asking questions, because I didn't say anything about hate. I have real questions about real people that I serve in my district.
Rep. Marcel, will you take any questions? She waves. Rep. Chenevert?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't write anything to come down here. And I want to speak to my colleagues who maybe we feel different about this that are women. And I just want to tell you that I respect you. You are highly valued, and I have nothing against anyone who may think differently on this bill. But I want to challenge every man and woman in this space. This bill is simply reminding Louisiana that a male that has been a male since the beginning of time is still a male. It's simply reminding the state of Louisiana that a female, that when she was born in the 1900s, that she still can be acknowledged in with the same anatomy as a female today. This is not hate. This is to clarify. This is to remind Louisianians that we still believe in biology. We still think that there's men and women that are highly valued. And in committee that day, I spoke about this because I do have a daughter. We have two. And I remember when I grew up and I was doing softball and I was on swim team and we had locker rooms, that there was a guy's locker room and a girl's locker room. And guess what? There might have been people in that day that maybe they identified differently. But in my time, we went to locker rooms and bathrooms and gyms where the woman could completely undress and never had to worry about a male being naked in that space. This is not about hate. This is about standing for our daughters. Do you want your 7, your 10-year-old, your 14-year-old athletes to feel like there could be a question for them in their high schools, in their middle schools? Children, they should have that right. And I would even say it, I should have that right when I go to the gym and I go change clothes. This isn't about hate. This is about allowing the state of Louisiana to recognize that we believe in biology and that we care about everybody. But we believe that there's still males and there's still females based on biology of what our doctors have said for years. So I just want to remind all of us, and I pray that when we vote, that we're voting to acknowledge the sexes, the changing rooms, where people undress in the presence of others in a locker room or a shower room, that we still believe it should be just women and just men in these separate spaces. And I'm sorry for the passion, but for people that think this is not happening, you're living under a rock. It's happening from coast to coast. There are detention centers. This will protect the women in our detention centers. There are some states where they are allowing biological men in female detention centers and pregnancies have occurred. We are protecting them. This is not hate. This is not hate. So I want to challenge you, when you vote, think about your girls. Think about biology. Think about what doctors have said when children are born. It's a boy. It's a girl. We're just coming into line with that in the state of Louisiana that says we still believe that. It's not hate.
Rep. Chenevert, will you take any questions? Rep. Phelps for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I think I don't know if anyone has a problem of understanding how God made us. I don't know if that was the problem. But I think in the midst of all of this, and actually I was trying to work on another bill, I missed the point of how would we regulate it. I think Representative Marcel alluded to that. So with all of the knowledge that we have of protecting their girls, I have a daughter, so none of this is new to me. But I guess I'm asking at this point, I haven't read the entire bill. Since you have, what is the piece of regulation in this bill?
So I think it's something that I would have to look and speak with the Attorney General on this, and she was at the table that day. I think it could help in the future when we do have a policy in place for our state.
So
let's just say hypothetically, there's a Title IX discussion going on at the federal level right now.
Okay.
And so if there was a situation,
hold on.
they would have to do that.
Okay, I get you. I get the background on it, and we've heard all that. We've had these bills before, potentially. You said it was happening across coast to coast. I'm not familiar with one here in Louisiana, in my area. I understand all of that. I guess what I still was asking is where in here is the regulation part and the reason for the bill? What are we addressing in the bill that I was not able to locate?
Are you asking what it's doing as far as what we're addressing? It's not criminal I can ask him to come up since he works so closely with attorneys in drafting it specifically. So it's just really helping just understand the purpose of what boy means, female, changing room, dressing room, that we're acknowledging that there's biological differences and that we're just going to honor the spaces based on biology. That's
Okay.
what this is doing. And so I guess the entity, whether it's a school or a locker room, whatever, if there was a lawsuit or if there was something, we would just have it in place, and then that would just be kind of left up to the courts from, again, not an attorney, but it would be left up, but they would have something that would say, we've come to an agreement that there's a difference and that we're going to keep the spaces based on those biological differences. But he may be able to answer that question better than me. It's just helping. And when I say coast to coast, there are many examples of situations where there is biological differences, male, female, and where they're in bathrooms together or a locker room. I mean, it's happening right now with a massive gym. I'm not going to say which one, but it's happening, and I guess I pay attention because I do have kids that are in this world today, and I just want to make sure that we're not afraid to tackle, the hard conversations about this topic. That's all.
Okay.
That's all.
So this is just to further identify the genders. And we know that, and the bill is just explaining what that is. If this happened in the gym at the school or the rec center in one of our areas, what would this bill do? If a male went into a female bathroom?
Great question. It's a great question. It's just reinforcing that we have something in place that says that we have to be in separate spaces based on biological sex. In case there's a mix-up, if there is one, there was something in his area, but it's just to where we've decided in the state that we're going to stick with the biology of it. And so I guess it would just be case by case, Representative Phelps. I guess that's the only thing I could answer, right,
Okay.
based on that.
No, I thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, can I go sit down?
Rep. Bayham for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard that things such as we are now living in a post-biblical society where the morals that formed the foundation of our country are no longer in vogue and no longer applicable. We've seen through judicial rulings we're in a post-constitutional society because the Constitution was written hundreds of years ago and it was not really meant to apply to our modern era. Now it seems like we're moving to a post-factual society where facts are now a matter of opinion. Gender is considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. I don't use the word gender. That's a matter of, it's a construct, it's a matter of opinion. When doing the difference between a male and a female, I use the word sex. Sex is a fact. That is what you're born with. That is reality. This legislation recognizes facts. All of us, when we were young, we went to summer camp or retreat. When we had a co-ed retreat or a summer camp, the boys stayed in one unit, the girls stayed in another. Very simple. Wasn't a case of what you considered yourself, it was a matter of your sex. Is it a matter of fact? This legislation, unfortunately necessary in this society today, where people identify things that are not necessarily so, at least scientifically, seeks to provide guidance that I wish we wouldn't need to do. This isn't about religion. This isn't about hate or discrimination. This is about a recognition of fact. Thank you.
Rep. Wilder, you have a right to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Before my close, I would like to simply say that I believe that this is more about love being extended to over half of our population in the state, which is female. We have thousands of laws on the books, and many of them offer some sort of safety and protection for any number of reasons, to any number of people, institutions, and even inanimate objects. This bill simply asks to protect the privacy right of girls. One of my first events was the Republican delegation orientation, and we recognized that we have 29 women in this House, which is incredible, representing over 1.3 million people. But that means there's 76 men in this House. So to each of the men in this body, to the strong, capable, brave, accomplished, honorable men in here, especially the fathers, the husbands, and the sons, I have a question for each of you. Why have we, myself included, as men, even allowed this to get to this point? How'd we let things fall so far from the basic values of civility, honor, and chivalry? Where did it all go? With so many distinguished, noble, capable, and honorable men in this House chamber, it actually begs the question as to why I have to stand here and ask for your vote. But we'll see. So here we go. Here's our chance to publicly state where we stand to protect the rights for privacy, for our moms, our wives, and for goodness sakes, our daughters. On behalf of the women in my district and throughout the entire state of Louisiana who asked me to bring House Bill 608, I ask for your favorable vote. Thank you.
Rep. Wilder moves final pass the bills. In favor, vote yea. Those opposed, vote nay. Please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, vote your machine. Echoes yea. Members, vote your machine. Echoes yea. Members, are you through voting? The clerk will close the machine. We have 79 yeas, 16 yeas, and the bill finally passes. Rep. Wilder moves to adopt the title, moves to reconsider the vote, which bill finally passed. Lay the motion on the table without objection, so ordered.